Hi everyone. So we are back with the third part of this week. That is, this week topic. And now we are going to look at how inductive arguments can be strong inductive argument or weak inductive argument. Now, how do we classify? Once you have identified that this argument is inductive, and how do you identify that this argument is inductive? Well, basically on the common patterns that we have learned before. So once you have decided that this argument is inductive, the next is for you to analyze whether that inductive argument is strong or weak. So how can we differentiate between a strong argument and a weak argument? And this whole thing depends whether an inductive argument is well reasoned or poorly reasoned. If an inductive argument is well reasoned, automatically it will be a strong inductive argument. Likewise, if it is poorly reasoned, it will be a weak inductive argument. Now let us go through one by one first. Let us start with strong inductive arguments. Let me just give you an example here. The first premise is most college students own MP3 players. Now, Andy, that is the second premise, is a college student. And the conclusion is, so Andy probably owns an MP3 player. So this is a strong inductive argument. Why? Because it is well reasoned. And also another tip that I can share with you, if the conclusion is probably true, then it is a strong inductive argument. Now let us examine the conclusion here. Do you think that the conclusion is true? Yeah, because Andy can be among those most college students. Also, although there is also a tendency that Andy is not part of that most college students. But because most is far larger or bigger than less, therefore there is a stand or there is a high chance that Andy is part of that most college students. So the possibility of the conclusion to be true based on the given premise or premises is high. Okay, so this is how you identify. Now, when we talk about strong argument, we can also have a true conclusion or a probable true conclusion, but with true or false premises. Now, they are divided into two. If the strong argument that has all true premises, then we call them cogent argument. Now let us look at an example here so that you will understand better. The premise is no Malaysia Prime Minister has been a singer. Now let us examine the premise. Is the premise true? Yeah. Based on my understanding, the first Prime Minister is a royal from Kedah. The second Prime Minister, well, he can also be from, he comes from a wealthy family. The third Prime Minister, up until now, we don't have Prime Minister who is a singer or who used to be a singer. So the premise is true. Now let us look at the conclusion. Thus, probably the next Malaysia Prime Minister will not be a singer. Yes, there is a possibility. When there is a possibility of the next, when you decide that the conclusion is true, we can say that it is true because based on the trend, it is true. Yeah. Although I am not denying, because you must understand one thing, this is not certain. Inductive argument is all about possibility and probability. So this is not certain. So that is why the conclusion is there is a chance that, or there is, it is high likely that the next Malaysia Prime Minister will not be a singer based on the past events. Yeah. So you have the premise true and the conclusion true. Therefore, this is a strong argument. And on top of that, it is called cogent argument because it fits with the cogent argument description, and that is premise is true and the conclusion is true, and that argument is a strong argument. Now let us look at the second example. All previous Malaysia Prime Ministers have been Barisan Nasional candidates. Thus, probably the next Malaysia Prime Minister will be a Barisan Nasional candidate. Now, this is uncogent. Now, why it is uncogent? Because we can see that the premise is not true. Now, when you have a false premise, automatically, although the conclusion is true, because let us look at the conclusion first, yeah? Thus, probably the next Malaysia Prime Minister will be a Barisan Nasional candidate. There is a possibility. There is a possibility. Perhaps general election 15th, we are going to have, Prime Minister from Barisan Nasional. But why the premise is not true or is a false premise? Because based on our experience, right after Datuk Sri Najib, the seventh Prime Minister was Tun Dr. Mahathir, and Tun Dr. Mahathir came from Pakatan Harapan's coalition. And right after Tun Dr. Mahathir, we have now currently Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, who actually came from Pakatan Nasional. So as you can see, based on our experience, we had prime ministers who came not necessarily from Barisan National Coalition. So that is why the premise is false. However, the conclusion is true because general's election 15, there is also a possibility that the prime minister can be from Barisan Nasional. So when the conclusion is true and the premise is false, as long as the conclusion is true or probably true, automatically it is a strong argument, but it is categorized as uncogent argument because it does not fit with the description of a cogent argument, so it becomes uncogent. So when the premise is false, the conclusion is true, automatically uncogent. Now let's look at weak inductive argument. Now, the given example here, 55% of students at East Laredo State University are Hispanic. Lai Fang Wang, owner of Wang's Chinese restaurant, is a student at East Laredo State University. Therefore, Lai Fang Wang is probably Hispanic. Now, a weak argument, when you have a false conclusion in an inductive argument, automatically that argument is considered as a weak argument. And let us look at the conclusion here. We know that the conclusion is wrong because even by judging the name, we should already understand that Li Fang Wang could be of a different race. That Li Fang Wang could be a person out of that 45%, not that 55%. Yeah. And therefore, we can conclude that the conclusion is false. But let us look at P1 and P2. Both premises are correct. So when both premises are correct or true, but the conclusion is false, then it is considered as weak inductive arguments. Now, when you have identified a weak inductive argument or a weak argument, automatically a weak inductive argument is uncogent argument. There is no two ways about it. Okay, so let us look at this